Everyone, it's Mindy Egan for Lawn Fawn, and in today's video, I'm going to be making an interactive slider card and combining some new sets with some previously released stamp sets. I'm going to start by stamping out the images that I picked out. So I have a nice flight, all the clouds, and just plain awesome. I laid them out on a piece of white 80-pound cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I am going to stamp these using my Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink and my MISTI tool. I'm going to be coloring my images in using some alcohol markers. So after I stamp them down, I am going to take a heat tool to it and make sure that my black ink is nice and dry before I begin coloring. That way I don't risk smearing the black ink. The markers that I'm going to use today to color in my images are the Ohuhu markers. So these markers have two different tips to them. There is kind of a brush tip to them, and then the other side of it is a bullet nib. That is the design that I picked out for the set that I have. I'm going to be coloring in my mice using the colors E511, E58, and E46. So, depending on the direction that the mice are facing, is going to determine where my darkest color is going to be. So, if the mouse or the mice are facing to the right, I will put my darkest color on the left. Because to me, they are facing the sunlight or the light source, and that's going to make it the lightest area. I'm creating this card based off of a design that I did that was shared during release week. I had kind of a little fleet of mice that were flying across the front of the card, and that was interactive as well. But I decided to combine the Have a Mice flight with the Just Plain Awesome stamp set. I'm going to keep things simple for myself and color in their scarves with red. So for those, I am using R016, R014, and R0112. And this is a nice range of darkest to lightest. So, again, just kind of determining where the mice are facing, and the same thing with their scarves to add in my darkest and lightest shades. I came in with E81 for the ears and the nose. I did BV31 for the goggles. And I also used BV31 on the airplane just to add a little bit of shading to those paper airplanes. And then the BV31 and BV32 for the clouds. And I really just traced inside of the cloud outline. Then once I have all of the images and clouds colored in, I'm going to line up the coordinating die, hold them down with a low tack tape, and run them through the die cut machine. The background for my card I'm going to create with the Lawn Fawn inks and an 80-pound white cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. Because of the die that I want to use from Slide On Over, I need to create my card in a landscape orientation. I'm starting at the top using the fresh lavender ink. I went a little bit about halfway. I'm kind of fading off as I get to the halfway point. Then I'm going to come in with merman ink. I'm starting in the center and I want this to blend up into the lavender, but I also want it to blend down a little ways because this is going to overlap with the next color I'm going to use, which is going to be lemonade. It is a really bright yellow. And when it overlaps with the merman, it creates a really fun shade of green. Now, in between each of these colors I'm blending, I do clean up my work surface just so I don't pick up any of that extra ink when I'm blending with the new color. For a little added interest, I'm going to stencil on some clouds. So I did secure my cardstock down to my work surface with some repositionable tape. I placed the stratus clouds stencil over the top and held that down with washi tape. And then I'm going to go over all of the clouds using the white pigment ink and a paper pouncer. So it's kind of a spongy type of tool. It's really hard to pick up white pigment ink with a blending brush and get this nice look. So I like to use some sort of sponge or paper pouncer just to have that subtle interest in the background. Another thing I wanted to try was doing some splattering with my actual ink pads. So I took the fresh lavender, I squished it down into my work surface, added a little bit of water, and then picked that up with a paintbrush to add some splatters. In hindsight, I kind of wished I would have used a darker shade of purple for the splatters, but this works as well. I also did that with the merman, squished it down onto my work surface, added a little bit of water, and then splattered that on. You can see the colors more like the merman, you can see down in the yellow a little bit better than the tone on tone. Of course, I needed to come in and add some white because the white just stands out so nice against the background. Then once again, before I do any die cutting out of this panel, I am going to hit that with my heat tool to make sure all of those splatters are nice and dry. Now I'm going to bring in the slide on over die set. I actually have two die sets on this magnet sheet, but I want the slide on over. And I picked the one that was fairly long, but kind of curvy. So I used my die cut mice as kind of a guide on where I wanted it to be. Once I had that position in place, I ran that through the die cut machine to trim out my track. Then I picked out the mouse that I wanted to have going across that track, and I am going to add these snap and spins. There's a lot of different ways you can make this a slider card. You can use pennies I've seen in the past, or even die cut circles connected with small foam squares, but these are super easy. They snap like a button. There's going to be two different ends. One is going to go through the front. I'm using the flatter side of these snap and spins. And then I just place the other one in the back to secure it and snap in place, just like a button. And it slides so good. And it also spins, which I think just makes this card even more fun for that mouse that's going to be kind of sliding across that track. To attach my mouse, I am using some glue dots to secure that in place. So as I give this one a test run, you can see he's kind of sliding and spinning, and it just looks like a lot of fun. I flip this over and now we need to add dimension on the back so that there is room for the slider. I'm going to go across all of the outside edges using some foam tape, and then I'm going to place some towards the inside as well. But you want to make sure that you're staying away from that slider piece when you are adding your foam tape, because if it's going to hit your foam tape, it won't slide. So I do want to add a lot in there for support, but just make sure that it doesn't bump into the foam tape. So I also give this kind of a test run, make sure it's not running into anything or sticking. I have another panel that I kind of was practicing with beforehand, so I'm going to place that behind it. But you could just do a little bit of ink blending on the bottom portion of a white piece of cardstock. You don't have to do a whole blended panel. I just happen to have that one on hand. I remove the backing of all of the foam tape. I'm going to place that over the top of the background. That way, when you look through the track, any of the open areas, it's going to mainly or somewhat match the front of the card. I laid out all of my die cut pieces the way that I want them to look on the front of this card. And once I had that in place, I started attaching everything using a tape runner. So the clouds are going to be in the very back part of the card project. All of my mice are going to be popped up with foam squares. I also have a sentiment picked out, and I have that just kind of placed there as a guide so I make sure that I'm leaving enough room for it. Once I have everything in place, I can then flip this over and trim off any excess that's hanging off the edge of the card. I think that really helps with the design is having something kind of hanging off the edge. Now, I also went ahead and die cut out a white stitched rectangle frame. I just thought it kind of added a little something, maybe frame the design a little bit. And so I made sure to add all of my images first and then came in with the stitched frame and added that with liquid glue. I wanted the sentiment to really pop off of the background, so I am going to be heat embossing this using some black licorice cardstock. I have the cardstock prepped with an anti-static powder tool. I'm going to ink it up with the white pigment ink and stamp it down a couple times to get a really good impression. And then once I have that done, I will go ahead and sprinkle on my white embossing powder, kind of give it a little tap to make sure that it is really setting into that ink. The pigment ink does stay wet a little longer, which is why I like to use it. And then I can melt that with my heat tool. I couldn't find my banner strips, my sentiment strip banners. So I am just using my paper trimmer to trim that sentiment out into a thin strip. And then decided that I wanted this to be two lines for a sentiment. So once again, I use the paper trimmer so that I have "You're just plain" and then "Awesome" is on its own. Right now, I just have that sentiment placed there. I didn't glue it down. I felt like my background was just missing something. So off screen, I went ahead and stamped and die cut all of these stitched trails. This came from the Just Plain Awesome stamp set. And I'm just using some liquid glue to add those in. And I thought that filled in the scene nicely. Then I could go ahead and add my sentiment. I did stack some additional strips behind it to give it a little bit of dimension from the background. And then once everything is complete, you can see how fun that little mouse is in his paper airplane, kind of flying or sliding across the front of my card. He spins, he slides. He just looks like he's having a ton of fun. And I love being able to take new products and pairing them with previously released products that are in my stash. It just gives them a new life. Thank you all so much for joining me today and have a wonderful rest of your day.